It's okay not to be okay, but I promise I'm trying. By rayrae118. Chapter 3, Redo. Harry and Ginny barely made it down to the train before it departed, and had to walk almost the whole length before they found Ron and Hermione seated towards the back, looking rather worried. However, their expressions cleared immediately when they saw the two. Ron barely gave them a chance to sit down before he was asking where they had been.
When I went back to grab my trunk, yours was already gone. Hermione said you had probably already left for the train, but we couldn't find you. What happened?
If his expression hadn't been so worried, Harry might have been annoyed. As it was, he couldn't fault either of them for being concerned. He shrugged.
Sorry, Ron. Ginny and I were heading down when McGonagall asked for a word.
Ron and Hermione shared a quick glance. Is everything all right? Hermione ventured, wondering what the professor might have wanted the morning they were to depart for the summer. It was Harry and Ginny's turn to look at each other, once more seeming to share an entire conversation with just one glance. Finally, Harry turned back to his friends and shrugged.
We talked about a few things. She told me about my parents.
His expression grew pensive and slightly wistful. He made a mental note to speak with Neville sometime soon. He knew that the shy boy lived with his grandmother, and was curious as to what had happened to his parents. He wanted to know what had happened to his godmother. He smiled gratefully at Ginny when she grasped his hand once more, an action that garnered the attention of both Ron and Hermione, though neither chose to comment at that time. Clearing his throat, Harry continued,
I don't really want to talk about it right now.
He braced himself for an explosion, but was surprised when neither commented. In fact, both actually seemed to understand, nodding in agreement. He let out a sigh of relief, and decided to get in some reading now, while he still had access to his textbooks. Pulling out the arithmancy textbook was met with confusion by Ron, and approval by Hermione.
Mate, why are you reading that? You're not even taking arithmancy.
Harry grimaced and looked at his friend.
That's actually one of the things McGonagall and I talked about. I'm tired of putting up with Trelawney, so I asked her about changing electives. I borrowed Hermione's book after classes ended, and I actually understood a lot of it. McGonagall said she'd talked to Professor Victor about me taking the third-year final exam in September, and if I pass, I can drop divination.
Once more he expected an explosion, but was pleasantly surprised when Ron just stared at him dumbfounded. Finally, he just shrugged.
Well, I guess I can't fault your reasoning there, he admitted. Trelawney's pretty unbearable.
Hermione was simply beaming. I'm so proud of you, Harry, she practically gushed. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to owl me. It'll be so great to have you in class next year. Harry tried not to laugh, but her enthusiasm was so infectious that he couldn't hide the smile.
Thanks, Hermione. He chuckled. McGonagall actually told me I should owl you too.
Hermione's smile, if possible, got wider. And on that note, the four of them hunkered down for the ride. Hermione pulled out her Ancient Runes text, while Ron perused a Quidditch magazine, and Ginny seemed to be reading the arithmancy book over Harry's shoulder, until he realised what she was doing and lowered the book, moving it over so it was in both of their laps. Ginny smiled her thanks, and the hours seemed to melt away as the terrain outside the windows changed from barren fields to rocky hills to farmland and back again. It wasn't until the trolley witch had come and gone, leaving them a few galleons lighter but more weighed down with pumpkin pasties and chocolate frogs, that Harry came out of his arithmancy trance. He looked up and studied his friends for a few more moments. Ron had fallen asleep while reading. His head was resting against the window, but Hermione seemed to be puzzled over something she was reading. Her brow was furrowed and her lips moved soundlessly. Feeling the eyes on her, Hermione looked up and met Harry's gaze. He smiled slightly.
Everything all right there, Hermione?
He asked quietly, trying not to wake up his red-headed friend. Next to him, Ginny also looked up. Her concentration at trying to figure out a subject she would begin to be studying next year broken. Hermione flushed a little, embarrassed at being caught not understanding something only for a moment, before she relaxed. Harry would never judge. She knew. She shrugged, moving one shoulder up and down as she looked back at the text. "I'm just trying to learn ahead a little," she replied, flipping the page and furrowing her brow. Harry and Ginny shared a knowing glance, before they both returned back to the bushy-haired witch. Harry took this opportunity to learn a little bit more about yet another subject he was regretting not taking. Now that he had learned a little more about it, he realized just how useful it might be. Runes were used a lot in the creation of wards, and he had taken some time after classes had ended to read up a little on the topic in the library. It sounded like a rather fascinating subject. Ginny seemed to understand what Harry was thinking, because she asked Hermione to give her an overview of the subject, since it, too, was one she would be taking next year. That was all it took for Hermione to go off, discussing translations and runic applications. For a while, she spoke about the career of a cursebreaker, and the way they used both ancient runes and arithmancy. Her voice took on a slightly dreamy quality as she talked of ward construction, and the way they could be woven together. It sounded more like an art than anything else, the way she described it. When Hermione seemed to have run out of air, Harry felt safe to break in.
"That sounds really interesting. I'll be interested in learning more, but I don't want to take more than one textbook away from you for the summer. It's too bad I can't get to Diagon Alley easily."
Hermione's eyes lit up, but it was Ginny who answered. "You could always owl order the book," she suggested. Harry turned his questioning gaze on her, and Ginny elaborated. "Flourish and Blotts has an owl order business. All you have to do is send them the payment and we'll book you on. If you do it often enough, they'll probably set up a tab." She looked at him sidelong, and then amended. "Actually, you could probably just ask them to set up a tab. They'd never deny the boy who lived anything." Harry spluttered for a moment before he caught the decided twinkle in the redhead's eyes. He growled lightly, but returned the smile that she gave him readily enough.
"I think I'll do that," he told them.
The train started to slow, announcing their arrival to London. Ron began to shift and stretch, waking up slowly as he looked around.
"What'd I miss?"
he asked, blinking owlishly. Harry and Hermione smiled while Ginny just shook her head.
"We were just talking about electives," Harry answered. "Hermione was explaining ancient runes to me and Ginny."
Ron grimaced. Term had just ended, for Merlin's sake. They had a whole summer to relax, and all they wanted to do was talk about school. He tempered his reaction, though, when he took a good look at his best friend. As the train slowed even more, even he couldn't fail to notice the dread settling around Harry. As the train screeched to a stop, he saw the black-haired wizard swallow harshly, before steeling himself to stand up. Harry handed the arithmancy book back to Hermione.
"Thanks for letting me borrow this,"
he said gratefully, his voice quiet with anxiety.
"I'll just order my own, along with the ancient runes one."
Hermione nodded, feeling her own apprehension rise as she watched her best friend close himself off, becoming almost an emotionless husk of a human. To be perfectly frank, it scared her. The four of them made their way onto the platform quietly, looking for the large group of redheads they knew would be the easiest to spot. Mrs. Weasley was waving them over from where she stood with Percy, Fred, and George. After a round of hugs, in which Harry did his level best not to flinch, she stood back and smiled matronly. "How was your term, dears?" she asked, reaching over to wipe some non-existent dirt off of Ginny's face. The redhead leaned back, trying to avoid the embarrassing gesture, although, inwardly, she rejoiced in the feeling of having a mother at all, remembering what Harry had told her of his relatives just this morning. "It was fine, Mrs. Weasley," Hermione answered, looking around for her own parents. She had taken the question, somehow knowing that Harry probably wasn't up for speaking just now. Indeed, he simply nodded in agreement, before turning to say goodbye to his friends. Hermione stopped searching as she turned back to him, and wasted no time in grabbing him for a tight hug. She tried to pass on her support to him without saying anything, but she felt like he understood when he began to hug her back. Stepping away, she lowered her voice slightly. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to owl." Harry nodded and turned to Ron. The two boys shook hands, though their grasp was slightly tighter than normal, as Ron, too, offered his support. Ginny surprised everyone by following Hermione's example and grabbing the boy who lived in a firm embrace. She squeezed her eyes shut tightly, willing herself not to cry again. Not here, in front of everyone. When they let go, both of their faces were slightly red, and Harry's eyes were suspiciously bright. Ginny couldn't help but hug him again, though this time it was slightly less unyielding, and she whispered, "Remember, you promised me. You'll let me in, right?" She felt him nod, even as he replied, "I promise." His voice slightly muffled by her hair. They pulled away again and locked eyes. After a moment, he smiled, though it seemed a little forced. "All right," he told her before turning to face the rest of the Weasleys. They all seemed confused at the closeness the two seemed to share, since, as far as they knew, the pair had never really had a serious conversation. Ron couldn't help but wonder just what had happened on their walk up to Gryffindor Tower that morning. He vowed to have a rather uncharacteristically serious conversation with his sister at the first opportunity. Harry said his goodbyes to the closest thing he really had to family, before he decided it was time to face the music, and turned towards the barrier between platform 9 3/4 and King's Cross Station. On the other side, he found a rather angry Vernon Dursley, waiting with an irritated Petunia and a bored Dudley. None of them said anything as they saw Harry. Petunia simply sniffed haughtily, before Vernon spun on his heel and led the way back to the car. The trip back to Privet Drive was uneventful, and, moreover, completely silent. Harry's imagination began to run away with him, and he was very glad he had decided to send Hedwig on ahead, so she could hopefully avoid being locked up, should it come to that. Sure enough, no sooner had he passed the threshold to number 4 than Vernon had grabbed his trunk and thrown it into the cupboard under the stairs. The next thing he did was grab Harry's arm and haul him up the stairs, where he was unceremoniously dumped into the smallest bedroom. Harry heard the locks engage as he absently rubbed his arm where his uncle had grasped it. Clearly, his idea of what this summer would entail hadn't been that far off the mark. He could only hope that Professor McGonagall would remain true to her word and get him out of here quickly. Hedwig chose that moment to enter through the open window. Harry stroked her head as she came to rest on his shoulder, and he smiled slightly. Just seeing the owl made him feel better. Harry took a moment to hunt around for a spare bit of parchment, on which he quickly scribbled a brief note to Flourish and Blots, asking that they owl him the 3rd year Ancient Runes textbook and the 3rd and 4th year arithmancy books. He was startled from his writing when an unfamiliar owl entered the room, coming to a rest on top of his dresser. Harry took the letter from the regal bird with a nod of thanks, hunting around in the top drawer for a bag of owl treats he knew he had left there the previous summer. He hoped they would be all right, since the other bag of treats he had was currently in his trunk locked under the cupboard under the stairs. The owl gave him a somewhat dubious look, but took the treat readily enough, and with a sweep of its wings, it was once more out of the window. Harry turned to the letter, and, unfurling it, was surprised to find McGonagall's tidy handwriting. Hedwig left her perch on his shoulder and moved over to the dresser, as he sat down on the bed and began to read. Dear Harry, hearing or reading his first name from Professor McGonagall would definitely take some getting used to, Harry thought wryly.
I hope your return trip to London was both relaxing and enjoyable. I wanted to assure you that I am doing everything possible to keep my promise to you. I have sent a note to Amelia Bones, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She is a very fair woman, and I trust her. I am hopeful that we will be able to come for you within the next week or so. The other reason I wanted to write to you was to talk to you about another topic you may find interesting. I noticed this morning that you seemed very interested in the privacy wards I sent before our conversation. If you have an interest in the subject, I would recommend reading some books on ancient runes. While privacy wards are some of the simplest wards to create, utilizing more spell work than runes, the topics are comparable, and I think, if you are interested, and if you work hard this summer, we may be able to see about getting you into the 4th year Ancient Runes class as well. Please do not hesitate to owl me if you need anything, and please feel like you can come to me if you need help. Minerva McGonagall. Harry reread the note, brow furrowing as he took in the implications. Truthfully, in his readings of the subject utilizing the library, he had found the topic fascinating. He wished the second years had been given more advice regarding their elective choices. Had he really had the subjects explained to him, he never would have gone for divination rather than arithmancy or ancient runes. He had only chosen his subject because Ron had picked the same ones. But, in all honesty, neither divination nor care of magical creatures would help him with any career he might choose. Picking up his note of Flourish and Blots, Harry added the Ancient Runes 4th year textbook as well, before walking over to Hedwig and tying the note, along with a small pouch filled with a few galleons he had luckily still had in his pocket, to her leg. "Can you take this to Flourish and Blots for me, Hedwig?" Harry asked, giving her a year-old owl treat, which she took, though she didn't look too happy about it. Hedwig gave him a beady stare, which he understood to mean, "Why, after all these years, do you even have to ask?" Harry smiled and held out his arm, which she hopped onto for a ride over to the window. Once Hedwig was no more than a distant speck in the sky, Harry returned to his bed, lying down fully clothed and closing his eyes, trying to think about everything that had happened in the last day. He was so tired, however, that no sooner had his eyes closed than he was asleep. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that one. I like that chapter, that's a good one. Even though, oh boy, we're getting into the Dursleys. I don't like this family. Sometimes they're given a bit of interesting depth. For example, when Dudley is attacked by the Dementors, did you know that he actually saw himself the way he truly is? None of the delusions his parents fed him, and that's why he changed so drastically. I find that fascinating because sometimes you do need a wake-up call in order to truly realise your full potential. They were stunting him very badly, because as much as they neglected Harry, they also spoiled Dudley, which is just as detrimental to a child's health. Though admittedly I'm not a psychiatrist, but I do know that sometimes you ruin someone by giving them too much. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.